take a look at what's coming up on tonight's programme.
It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to the second Learning Now TV programme of June 2020. Nigel, what have we got on the show today?
Well, really good as usual, Kate. I'm going to highlight 3 interviews, which I think everyone will enjoy. The first one is from David Perrin, talking about the research report, which you know a lot about anyway, Kate. The research report focusing on the post-COVID or the in-COVID lessons learned for L&D. Everybody ought to be downloading that report and looking at it. And David and I have a very interesting discussion which goes well beyond the report. Well worth a listen and a watch. The second is Alex Haslacher. Alex is from a startup in Princeton, New Jersey called Blank Slate. And Alex's company focuses on spaced repetition with enormous success, and he's got lots of data which he shares to show the advantage of the kind of AI selection of what you don't know and the focus on what you don't know, whereas it leaves what you do know behind. So you only focus on those elements where you can continue to learn. And finally, we've got Annalyn from Filtered. She was one of the great 30 under 30 stars, really, both from the Learning Conference in the US and from Learning Technologies in the UK. And she's got a huge amount to say about what it's like being young, what her perspective on the L&D industry is, and where she sees it all going. So it's a great program coming up.
Fantastic. Enjoy the show.
There's a new research report released recently about the impact of COVID-19, largely on HR, but on kind of support services for organizations. And there is one person who is probably the best person in the world to talk about that, and it's David Perrin. David is a director of Fosway, and this report emanates from Fosway, the UK analytics company. So David, welcome first of all. Thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Nigel.
What I'd like to ask you first is, you did this research report. Tell us first of all how many organizations responded and where they came from.
Yeah, we did this as a very quick research project. We've got about 120 respondents since we even created the infographic. So that's our sort of sample size. So it's very small. It's focused around European corporates. They range from organizations that would be 1,000 employees up to 50, 60,000 employees. So they're quite a nice little snapshot, a very useful reference point for, maybe the question for people to ask is, does this sound like me? And I think it's just something, isn't a definitive answer, much more about sort of holding up a little bit of a mirror to everybody to say, how have you found the journey? What's your experience been? And what's working?
What are the headlines? Tell me what the things that slightly surprised you coming out of it.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things that didn't surprise, if that makes sense. So everybody's been impacted. 94% say that they've had to change their strategy. But what's interesting around that number is that 2/3 have had to change their strategy significantly. And I think that sort of shows almost through the infographic that we've shared, that sort of sense of swing towards digital learning. Obviously, the first reaction in the crisis has been to virtualize training. And we've seen a massive jump in people's adoption of virtual classrooms. But that seems to have been the sort of immediate reaction as the house is burning down. What do we do? We come up with some contingencies. And I think one of the interesting things is, what do we do next? Yes. But I think overall, some of the big headlines I'd probably pick out is, when you look at the comparison between people who were mature in their use of digital learning and those who are less mature, and those who found it easy to cope with the change that has been brought on by the pandemic, and those who found it harder, people who are maturer in their adoption of digital learning found it twice as easy. And I think that's sort of, obviously that sort of comes with the territory a little bit. You can probably think about people knowing that actually digital gives them scale, it gives them reach. And that sort of shift has been sort of, I suppose, quite predictable in a way. But we've seen people say that, well, 84% of the respondents say that they've seen an increase in the demand for digital learning from their stakeholders. And we've seen about 71% say they've seen an increased demand for digital learning from their end users. So there has been a groundswell, and that's all been very situational, if for want of a better word.
Have you any indication of just how much of that is knee-jerk reaction? Oh, we're in a panic, let's just do something. And how much is measured strategy that will endure?
Yeah, I think there's two things, right? I think when the house is burning down, you'll obviously take some immediate action. And I think everybody's gone through that. Through the research, the questions that we asked, we're very interested in understanding how COVID has changed learning, is that sense of about 1 in 5 have had to rush through or expand a solution that they already had. So they actually proactively had to go out and buy something new or extend what they had. So that sort of shows that maybe an initial knee-jerk reaction. But what's interesting is when we ask people, and this was the sort of reason why we sort of talked about L&D may never be the same again. When we ask them, how likely are you to go back to what L&D was before the pandemic? Only 5% say they will revert back to what they used to do.
Wow, 5%.
5%.
Which basically is virtually everything. And probably those 5% didn't think about it carefully enough.
Yeah, well, you never know, right?
Oh, you never know.
Yeah, but there's a few people sort of sat on the fence. You probably got about 30% almost just sitting on the fence saying, well, it's a bit early to tell. And I think that's a fair assessment for certain industries. But the vast majority, 67%, said, no, these changes have created a major shift in what we do and how we do it. And I think that's why I'd start to say probably things will never be the same again, because what we've done is almost virtualize our learning in reaction to COVID. What's going to come next is the thing that usually preceded everybody, right? Whenever you went into e-learning, and traditionally it was to save cost and increase scale. And I think as we start to see the economic sort of shockwaves come through after the sort of initial wave of the virus, then I think people are going to see increased cost pressures, and that's going to almost solidify people.
Yes, and perhaps accelerate it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the most astonishing things that I've found from looking at the infographic was how unprepared some of HR is to deal with the analytics side of it. That 40% were getting their data from basic questions like, who are our people most at risk? Why would you not expect that question? They're using spreadsheets to try and get hold of that data. That would be a nightmare. That would mean HR people spending day after day pouring through spreadsheets, cutting and pasting. And yet, if they had a proper tracking and analytics system, it's basically push a button.
Yeah, and
did that surprise you?
In some ways, no. and that's because I think that the systems themselves would have to have been set up to track a pandemic or report on people's unavailability for work in a way that it's not used to be doing. And again, it's a knee-jerk reaction of what do we need to do in the shortest amount of time? And actually, spreadsheets are pretty scalable. You can't, they're not efficient by any stretch of the imagination, but you can devolve the completion of a spreadsheet down to a manager and collect that centrally. It's a quick fix, but it's not a long-term solution. So in some ways, I wasn't surprised by that at all. I think what it means for organizations and how they then think about what the return to work means and how they manage that, that's where the rubber hits the road now. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for organizations. They think about tracking that, understanding the capacity within their environment. People are going to be really busy.
Don't you think that this is going to be a huge push towards better analytics? That people are saying we need this data. Even when we're back from COVID, there are times when we're going to really have to be more agile, more flexible, and be able to provide the data, reasonable data that the executive team are asking for. None of the questions that the C-suite are asking seem to me to be unlikely questions, pretty obvious questions. And the fact that some of HR is struggling with that would indicate there's a big push coming. Would you agree?
I think I'd agree. And I think it probably works as much on the management of resource in terms of who's here and who's not, but also in how we harness the skills of our people. So going to the next phase of the sort of recovery, as you might call it, then I think we're going to see organizations think much more proactively about who's got what skills and how can we apply those to enable us to create some agile, fast, and significant change in our organization, especially as we start to flex to new markets, new opportunities, or the demise of certain parts of our existing traditional markets. So I think that sense of understanding who works for you, what they're able to do, how you can coalesce them virtually into new project teams to help you drive your business forward is going to be something where analytics becomes really important, and that relies on good data.
I completely agree with you. So you could argue that this is a wake-up call, and that from this point on, organizations would be better prepared, be thinking about these things that they've kind of avoided thinking about because it was a bit difficult. And now they're confronting the reality of not knowing anything about their workforce, essentially, at a time when they need to.
Definitely. And I like the quote from Milton Friedman, who said, it's only a crisis, perceived or real, that creates real change. And I think we're in that situation. I sort of lived through the dot-com boom back at the sort of start of the century. Sounds like a long time ago. But we went from, as a telecoms company, from having 25,000 employees down to 12,000 within a year. And that sort of sense of, so how do you drive value fast? How do you cut cost almost sort of relentlessly, but do more with so much less, is something that becomes top of the agenda. And it's all about providing value, driving exceptional return on the available resources that you have. And that's not just about how you use resources, but the impact that it has.
Yes, and also I think probably engage better with your workforce so that they feel more valued, they feel more empowered, more able to take decisions. That will drive efficiency and drive up the value that they get back.
Yeah, and just a whole new skill set, right? And I'm sure people have found their way through coping mechanisms to work virtually. Something I've been working virtually for 10 years, and it's just nice to have more people around at home because the family's here, so less isolated. But I know for many people, they will actually be alone on their own for the last few weeks. So actually trying to make sure that people are able to sustain their working levels, don't get burnt out through these times, make sure they're focusing on the right things, that requires some new management skills.
Yes.
And I think it solves a lot more conversation, a lot more democracy in the way organizations are run. So I hope these positive changes come through.
I think so. I'd like to believe that the end of the micromanaging bully is nigh, because they're just failing spectacularly in this environment. Whereas the manager you're describing is actually making a contribution, helping empower, enable, and support his or her staff. And that seems to be a bottom line as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Again, back in the days, sort of in the 90s, I worked in self-managing teams. And really interesting, the sort of dynamic you get around people all taking a leadership role within a team to deliver outcomes. You do have a sense of hierarchy, you have to report progress, but you do that as a team. And I think that's some interesting models around how we now engage so much more freely through MS Teams and tools like that, Slack, etc., that we're probably in a position to adopt some more of those practices and allow people to really feel genuinely engaged with their work. But there's experimentation to do across industries. There's lots of things to learn. And I think that's one of the interesting things, right? Again, from the studies of after virtual classrooms, it was learning experience platforms and collaborative learning platforms, which people said were being the most successful. And I think we need to recognize that lots of the learning about what really works is going to come from our people. So that collaboration and sharing is going to be really hyper important.
It's organizations reaching down to their people rather than imposing down on their people.
Exactly.
That is the big shift. David, I want everyone to read this report. It's a great infographic. They can get the data. We're putting a crawl across the screen. It's free download. And anyone in any organization that doesn't absorb the logic and the flow of this report is being very naive. So David Perrin, I'm very, very pleased to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for kind of bringing the report alive for us. I thought that was really helpful and very, very interesting.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you.
The Happy Manifesto is a book that can help you transform your organisation into a happy, productive workplace where people feel fulfilled. We are now launching an online version of the programme based on bite-sized videos, exercises and learning points. It will launch in January on Udemy at just £50, and there'll be an enhanced version from Happy, which will include webinars and further exercises. Join us to help transform your organisation. I'm Henry, I'm happy, I hope you are too.
Rob Clark from Learning News is interviewing the founders of a new institute called Tulsa. The focus is on the linking of learning to business results. And the founders are well known: Charles Jennings, Vivian Heinen, Joss Aretz, and finally our very own Laura Overton.
70-20-10 is one of the models that we've relied upon to move learning and development from the old ways of providing courses to everyone once every few months to helping to get learning embedded in the culture of work. And the people behind 70-20-10, Joss Aretz, Vivian Heinen and Charles Jennings, have become very well known as they have gone about mobilising many in L&D behind 70-20-10's principles. Today the team is announcing a brand new initiative and a brand new company, Tulsa Global. They want to refocus how learning and development sees itself and rebuild the L&D function as an enabler of business results. And to help them to do this, they've recruited a fourth and very familiar face, Laura Overton, the former CEO and founder of Towards Maturity. I caught up with the whole team to find out all about it, starting with Charles Jennings.
We're pulling together a team that's independent with deep experience, deep insight and plenty of practical know-how to help organizations make some fundamental changes at a time when it's really critical.
We think it's about time to show the alternatives to what we're doing right now. We see this as kind of a greenfield site. It's possible that we have raised formal learning almost as high as it can go. But all the strategies, tools, processes and methodologies required to deliver real business values haven't really been developed or used.
Our ultimate goal is that we are not only on the HR scorecard, but that we are on the balance scorecard of the organization delivering business value.
Laura, welcome. You've just joined the team. What excites you about the challenge ahead?
This team had experience and insight, and also my own research was kind of highlighting that it is possible for learning and development to genuinely become business critical, but things absolutely have to change. Real change in organizations is very, very complex. You know, we have to, as learning professionals, be able to work differently with the business, with the stakeholders within the business, but also with partners and with suppliers. And these are very complicated organizational challenges that are very critical for us to address. Certainly all the evidence is pointing to that, but it's tough to be able to achieve. And I think that's one of the challenges that we want to tackle head on as Tulsa.
We've seen performance consulting, business impact, the wider skills agenda, learning culture, alignment to goals, etc., etc. Is there a number of things here that sort of need pulling together, a number of threads that need pulling together here? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
You know, all these concepts and issues are interesting, but they represent the current language of L&D. If you want to be business aligned, you should stop reading L&D books. You should read business books. And I think moving forward, we need to rethink and to reinvent the way we are talking about performance consulting, about business impact, about learning value, learning culture. We have to move on, because otherwise L&D will stick into this L&D compartment, let's say a kind of silo.
We feel that many people see the urgency in making these changes, but many just don't know really where to start.
We need to make sure that everyone develops an understanding that there are alternatives to formal learning to solve problems. And it also need to work with the wider L&D communities to give them a better understanding of the solutions that work.
Why the move away from 70-20-10? What's missing that you want to create?
We know that everyone wants to improve performance and add value. So within Tulsa, we'll be focused on the wider challenges for L&D to deliver these things rather than just on 70-20-10 as an end in itself. However, we're sticking to the principles embedded in the 70-20-10 framework, which are to go beyond formal learning.
There's far more than only formal learning. Most of the learning is invisible, it's under the radar. So let's say the informal learning and the organization learning, you just don't see it, but it's really there. It's also very powerful. And I think we need to support not only L&D, but also business leaders to recognize the power of informal and the power of organization learning and combine it with formal learning.
Success will be a real challenge within our industry. We will be working with partners and as part of a global alliance with best thinkers and professionals across the world.
We want to work across the industry to bring like-minded people together. So from the supplier side of the industry, from corporate side of the industry, from everyone who's got a vested interest, we want to work together in order to achieve this goal of helping learning and development be really business critical in the future.
Our learning experiences unlock potential, transform the performance of people and organisations, and help millions around the world build happy and successful careers. We change lives with evidence-based learning that works, sparking real change for real impact.
Contrary to what they say, lightning does strike twice. I'm joined on only his second appearance on Learning Now television by Donald H. Taylor, Chairman of the Learning Technologies Conference London, amongst many other hats that he wears. Don, thanks for joining us.
Lovely to be here, Kate.
So we have a very specific thing to talk about today. So many of us were in mourning that the Learning Technologies Summer Forum get-together did not happen at the start of this month, but you're here to tell us that there is light at the end of the COVID tunnel.
Well, yes, but Kate, be honest, was it the conference or the get-together bit that you were missing more?
Both, obviously.
Ah, well, it's a very diplomatic answer, yes. The event was supposed to take place in June. We moved it to the week of the 13th of July. It's running all week. We are keeping the structure very simple. It is 22, effectively, webinars spread out over 5 days. So the first 4 days we'll have 5 each day, and then on Friday we've got 2 longer, more discursive ones. We're giving the speakers and the facilitators on each session plenty of leeway to be as flexible and creative as they'd like to be, to make sure they've got lots of interaction going on. And we're running sessions for 45 minutes with a half-hour gap between them, which is quite a short time, but I figured that if you're running events in a block like that, you can probably afford to keep them shorter.
looking forward to it. You know, lots of organizations, lots of people are doing different things this year, trying out online events. We want to keep the format reasonably simple, trying to make the content as engaging as possible in different ways, given the different speakers, and allowing them to lead on how they'll make it something worthwhile attending.
Okay, sounds good. You know, there's been a lot of discussion on my socials around the length of time people have attention spans for on virtual sessions. So have you got any sneak peeks for us on speakers or themes?
Well, we've got some speakers that people will recognise. Nigel Payne's, David Wilson's of this world that you'd expect to have coming along, but also Derek Mitchell and Kevin Yates. So that's a sort of analytics data focus, because people are very much wanting that. But also we've got Chloe Walton, Fiona McBride. We've got a slightly more of a softer wellness coaching approach there as well. Yeah. And we'll have international speakers. We've got people looking at design, looking at how you implement things. There'll be a number of themes running across it, things like implementation, technology and tools, the big themes, and also learning itself. So Miriam Nealon will be showing up and taking us through some of her work as well. And I'm also very keen to have a couple of panels on the Friday, one of which will be about moving learning online. Now, at the moment, everyone's talking about moving learning online, and it could get very tedious. But what I want to do is talk to people who've really battled with it, and maybe they've had tight budgets, maybe they've had no time to do it, and have a panel to have a good discussion about it. And another panel, which I think is very important for people at the moment in our field, how you can accelerate your career in L&D. A lot of people right now are having not necessarily doubts, but they're questioning what happens next, want to try and give them some practical advice. And indeed, that's really, as always, the theme of LTSF. It's a chance for me and the speakers to experiment a bit, and it's a chance for everyone to really focus on the practical. That tends to be where we come from with LTSF.
Yeah, it's much more of that sort of hands-on, maybe less formal presentation type of approach, isn't it? So just very quickly then, how do people register or get to take part?
You can be sure that you will receive an email at some point. I mean, this is close as still media. You can't escape it. So don't worry about that. But if you are desperate to go and find out, learningtechnologies.co.uk, and you'll find the LTSF site there.
And as ever, we were discussing just before we came on camera, we will be doing something around the back channel side of things as well. So even though it's online, we still feel that that's really important, don't we?
Well, the good thing about running something online is, yes, you don't get the face-to-face stuff, but your audience is the world. Now, we're deliberately running it from early mornings, late evenings, different days, to try to spread it around a bit. And I think that's really important. Increasingly, I do think, as we go into 2021, we'll be looking at all events having some form of online component. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that I think all events in 2021 and going forward after that will be hybrid. I think they're all going to recognize that you don't have to be confined by the four walls, and that's an exciting prospect. So yeah, the back channel is a really important part of what we're doing.
Good. Well, obviously I would agree with you on that. So we'll have you back on soon. I know you're working on some exciting things coming later in 2020, but for now, Don, thank you very much.
Lovely to be here, Kate. Thanks for having me.
DPG's online courses are designed to fit around your life, so you can study anytime, anywhere. Get in touch now for more info.
I'm thrilled to welcome our next guest to Learning Now Television. Alalyn Pellier is an enterprise relationship manager for Filtered. We first met earlier this year through the Women in Learning movement. Alalyn, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Kate. I'm so excited to be here.
It's my absolute pleasure. Now, we've talked about a lot of stuff in the short time that we've known each other. But one of the main reasons that you were at Learning Technologies in the first place is that you were part of the inaugural 30 under 30. So congratulations. And
Thank
can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what's involved?
So 30 under 30 is essentially about 30 people who are under 30 who are being recognised to be the next top leaders within the learning industry. I had the pleasure meeting and speaking with Don Taylor, Nigel Payne and Bob Musher, who are very well known within the industry. And it was just amazing trying to learn from them. And they were very inspirational, as you could probably imagine.
Yeah, well, our very own Nigel, obviously we're biased on that. But I think a big part of what I do with the Learning Technologies event is around the back channel and around some of the Women in Learning stuff, and even Learning Now TV is about paying it forward. And as somebody who is, starting to get on in years myself now, unfortunately, I just think it's great to embrace what's coming and all of this new talent that we've got. And I think the words I said to you after meeting you at Learning Technologies were, well, if this is the future of L&D, then the future's looking bright. And it's very exciting to me that we've got this initiative now in the UK. And how have you found that kind of peer group? Have you kind of kept in touch? Has it been useful going forwards from the event?
Yes, it's been really useful. We've got our own little group chat that we keep in touch with, which has been really supportive, especially what's happening at the moment. And we exchange ideas. For example, someone would say, has anyone implemented Agile within the industry? Or can anyone give us a good recommendation for LMS or LXP, for example? And even those that are perhaps wanting to change career. So it's a very supportive group, and it's a group that we, as usual, trying to learn from each other, supporting each other and collaborating. And I totally agree with you. It's about paying it forward. I recently someone contacted me and I recently spoke with her. She learnt about women in learning and learning 30 under 30 through a podcast or an interview that Sharon Kalubi had.
Yep.
And the reason I mentioned this, it just goes to show how initiative like this has been able to essentially get everyone together and making sure that everyone knows what the learning industry is about, helping each other forward, and make, as you mentioned, paying it forward essentially.
And building that sense of a personal
community
network. Yeah. And now you're somebody who has lots of kind of diverse interests, and obviously is quite a self-starter in terms of, trying other things and bringing that into your career. So you have your own podcast, I believe. How as things like that and the building project that you're involved with, how do things like that kind of add to the whole person and feed into your career in L&D?
So with my podcast, for example, it has allowed me to express myself clearly. It has allowed me to be more confident as well and be more creative, which essentially means that when I talk about my career within learning, I think differently. So I think about, okay, how can I give a creative solution to my client? And to be honest, it's also allowed me to improve in terms of thinking on my feet. So when I'm on podcast, even though you get to edit it, most of the time you want to make sure that it's as less edited as possible for us anyway. And in terms of building my apartments in the Philippines, I really, really had to adapt to the culture change when talking to different types of individuals in different cultures, and managing a project that's thousands and thousands of miles away from you. So it's allowed me to become more patient as well as problem solving. So how can I resolve this issue? If I'm not there, what are the different options in resolving these issues, for example? And if you relate it back to learning, that's what, when you're trying to learn in the beginning, for me anyway, you kind of get frustrated with yourself because you're not getting it. But then you're trying to find different solution in terms of, okay, I want to learn this topic. What can I do to make sure that I learn what I want to learn? So how can I resolve this issue of not learning what I'm trying to learn in the beginning? So that's taught me to think creatively, think differently, and also think about other ways. So not just thinking about the problem, but how can I solve this problem?
And obviously in a tech environment that you work in, a lot of the time that obviously leads to, some part of the system or solution that you're working with. But one of the challenges that we have in L&D is, like you say, we have a problem and we need to think about a solution. But often we think about the tech, not actually what good looks like at the other end. So would you say that that it helps sort of think beyond the tech, or how you might be able to pull different elements of the technology together to create something that would work?
Yeah, so it's thinking about, as a business, what is our strategy, what are our goals within that business? So, and how can this technology help us? So essentially, it's not just looking at an LMS or an LXP, for example. It's about how can this piece of technology resolve the issue that we are facing. I find, and I don't know whether you agree with me, sometimes we're so bogged down on what's happening in trend at the moment. So if there's everyone's talking about LXP, we must get an LXP. But does that even resolve the issue, the underlying issue that you're currently facing? Because because we may think, okay, a new platform is the next best thing, but is that actually going to answer, let's say, for example, the culture change that's happening within the industry or within the business that you're working with? Or are you just putting that as because it's the quickest way of resolving that, but down the line you realize what you've got, this piece of technology, doesn't actually answer your problem?
So we're going to run out of time in a minute, but I would love to just get a final thought from you on it's quite hard to put yourself out there doing things like podcasts, building apartments halfway around the world, learning sign language, which we haven't even managed to touch on yet. What would you say to people who are, they sit there and go, oh, I'd love to do that. How do you find the energy and also, I suppose it's not being scared of trying something and failing, or maybe you don't enjoy it. What would be the thing that goes through your head that you could maybe impart to someone? Because I can really see how all of these activities that you're doing feed into, a career in learning.
So there's a saying that I live by. It's feel the fear and do it anyway. So everything that I do, whether it's applying for a new job, trying to learn a new technology, or trying to experiment something, for example, or even if you want to talk to someone who you want to be your mentor, I just say to myself, feel the fear and do it anyway, because the worst thing that they can say is no, or the worst thing that can happen is fail. But I don't see it as fail, I see it as learning. And the only way you can fail is that if you don't try. So that's my whole mindset of things. So if I kind of say to myself, if I don't try it, then I failed. And if I try it, then I'm learning something.
And I really agree with that. I just think, not enough of us want to put ourselves out there. We're sometimes too scared of looking silly. And you are proof positive that is not the case. So, Annalyn, thank you very much for joining us. I'd love to have you back on sometime as we track your career through L&D.
Perfect. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks. Robin Hoyle, as ever, tackles the tough subjects on Learning Now television. This month, he's talking about the digital divide between those who have the skills to survive working from home in this digital era and those who don't.
Fosway published an infographic the other day which was about the research that they've done with organisations in the light of COVID-19, and they identified, amongst other things, I guess fairly predictably, but really interesting to see the numbers, that 71% of people had seen an uplift in demands for digital learning from their various teams and people within the business. 82% had seen senior stakeholders saying that they wanted more digital content. And fully 67% of people had said that they weren't expecting there to be a return to business as usual after the pandemic is over. So in other words, this increase in digital learning seems to be here to stay. And that raised a couple of thoughts for me, which was not least that we still have a bit of a digital divide. We've got people who are really comfortable with all of the digital platforms that we're creating, and other people who struggle when we introduce new pieces of software, and they struggle for a number of reasons. Now, there are those who are just not very good with computers, who do not feel that they're able to use them, they're lacking in confidence, they don't feel that they can navigate from different sites and know how to use them instinctively and intuitively. There are others, though, who've got other barriers that we've not necessarily thought about before. So some of them do not have computer equipment which is supplied by their employer. And maybe they've got one computer at home and they've got their kids at home who are trying to get on to do online learning from school and things like that. And so there is massive competition for those resources. I've certainly come across people who use computers every day but do actually relatively few activities. They use certain pieces of software and that's it. So when I introduce a new piece of software, whether that's some kind of collaborative platform or a learning experience platform, they're instantly a little bit flummoxed and don't know what to do or how to use them. And I wonder to what extent we are designing materials for those individuals. I was also speaking to somebody who works with people within the security industry the other day, and she was telling me that they have real issues with people either not having computers at all, or if they do have access to computers, they really don't know how to use them that well. And so that group of people who are now also expected to learn online and to learn digitally, having previously exclusively used face-to-face activities for their learning interventions, are now having to adapt and adopt new technologies which they're not familiar with. However, there is an answer to some of this stuff, because although people are not very familiar with their computers and maybe don't know how to use some of the things that are there, they do know how to use one of these. And virtually everybody these days has got a smartphone, and in some parts of the world, internet access is still predominantly via smartphone. And we need to be smart about how we use those tools and those devices. So think about how you're designing digital interventions. Unquestionably, you're going to be asked to create more and more of them, whether those are synchronous live video conference type classrooms, or whether those are delivering digitally via asynchronous techniques with e-learning, documents, etc., access to videos and the like. Those things are not going to be natural for people to use. First of all, are they optimized for the devices that people have got, smartphones, and that they know how to use smartphones? Do they rely on people having access to very, very good broadband? Do they rely on people having access to top-of-the-range computers? Do they rely on people having access to a computer at all? So we have to think about these things now. Maybe this is only a temporary issue for a year or two and things will change and people will get better at using these tools and technologies. But at the moment, I'm still noticing that people, in some cases, are struggling with being able to use the technology that they've got, or they can access the technology but then they find they've got pop-up blockers on and it stops them loading and accessing information. All sorts of things that they've never had to deal with before. And I think we've got a responsibility to help people make that transition. So design for the devices that people have got, but then also be prepared to support and resource that support properly, whether that's a help desk or it's giving people briefings or it's walking people through the technology that you want them to use. Because genuinely, I've been surprised at how much we have had to do that over the course of the last few weeks for people who've never previously had to access learning digitally, are finding some of that stuff really quite challenging.
In the L&D world, we all know our biggest challenge is knowledge fade and demonstrating ROI from our training interventions. At Elephants Don't Forget, we use artificial intelligence to guarantee that what you train your employees, they learn and retain. If you are looking to transform the impact your training content has in your business, improve the ROI, and perhaps help employees learn and retain even the dull regulatory material, drop me a line at nelly@elephantsdon'tforget.com.
It's not often that I get the chance to talk to someone right at the early stages of an EdTech startup. So it's really fantastic that I've managed to persuade Alex Haslacher to talk to me today. He's the Business Development Director for Blank Slate. And I think you'll find what Blank Slate are trying to do extremely interesting. So Alex, first of all, welcome to Learning Now Television.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Great. I'm really glad to talk to you. First of all, tell me about Blank Slate. What is Blank Slate? Why do you think I'm interested?
Well, yeah, we're just over 2 years old as a startup. So we just received our second round of funding. And I think you're interested because this all has to do with learning and development. And we're kind of challenging a lot of old ideas about learning. Mainly our approach is on the forgetting side. So we have quite an extensive algorithm-based software where we're actually able to predict who is going to forget what information, and more importantly, when that forgetting is going to happen, which really allows us to keep all learning, all training for whatever companies we work with, which include academia, corporate, government, even sports teams, but to keep all that learning and training front of mind, ensuring that all the time and money that organizations spend getting stuff into the brains of its people, that it actually stays there.
So this is spaced repetition. This is something that we've known about for over 100 years, but it's not something we've really exploited before because it was too difficult. But you've got a bit of smart tech that does that for us, haven't you?
We do. We have some pretty cool machine learning, which we do work with spaced repetition, but we also incorporate that. We kind of mesh that together with the forgetting curve. So funny enough, there's some funny historical irony behind the forgetting curve. It was published by Hermann Ebbinghaus back in 1885, I believe, in the same paper as the learning curve was published. Yet we somehow all remember the learning curve, and we all forgot about the forgetting curve. But our software is able to predict that forgetting curve on an individual basis. And once we marry it together with spaced repetition, we do get quite a unique product.
So it gets to know me, it gets to know what I really know, and I don't need any help in remembering. And it helps me with material that I find it more challenging to remember. And it prompts me, and then it keeps me at that level, doesn't it? So that I might start off at 90%, I drop rapidly, as you know, and then you push me back up so that I'm nudging 80, 90% for indefinitely until it's so embedded in my head that we don't need you anymore. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. So sadly, there was a great study done on the Lawrenceville Academy a few years ago, which popped up in a book called "What School Could Be," and the teachers at the Lawrenceville Academy actually went back and retested all of their students after the summer break on their final exams that they had taken, a mere 2.5 months earlier. Now you would expect for, a prep school of this size, of that reputation, and certainly of that price, that we all think, if we're going to pay enough money to get stuff into the brains of people, it's good. But if you're not spending any money or spending any time ensuring that it stays there, it gets lost. Turns out when these students retook all of their exams, the class average fell from a B+ to an F, with not one student actually having retained all the information from their previous academic year. So it shows us, it's not money wasted, but if you're not doing anything to retain that information in your head, then yes, it is wasted at some point. But what makes it really interesting on our side is that, yes, we can do all that predicting, and the machine learning will know when you're going to forget that information and in relation to the forgetting curve. Yeah, Nigel, to the point of the actual predictive analytics that go into the software is, being able to predict when you're going to forget stuff allows us to keep that all front of mind. If we look at the forgetting curve in itself, in the corporate sense, if you were to watch a webinar today, 30 days from now, the expectation is that you retain about 20% of that information. 80% of it will have been forgotten. What's unique with our software is that, according to the data that we have from many, many clients in many, many different industries, is that we see a level of retention of about 93% more than 90 days out of their original training.
That's amazing. That's remarkable.
Delta of 73%. And even if we were to be off by 50% of that, which the data shows we're not, still quite an improvement in regards to what it could have been had we not done any retention training.
What I love, Alex, is that you've got a dashboard, so that if I bought that software and I incorporated it, I get a real clear profile of where the difficulties are. So what everyone is struggling with, what a few people are struggling with, so that I've got an analytics picture of the whole and also the individual. So it's a really clear map, if you like, of the way the learning is working and the way people are engaged or not engaged with that learning. So you can actually make the learning better. You don't need to always rely on your software to kind of pick up the pieces. You can make it better so your software doesn't have to do so much heavy lifting next cycle round and next cycle round. But there's very few places where you can get that kind of fundamental analytics back as the manager of the learning.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The data analytics on the back end is quite extensive. And as you rightfully identified, we can look at individuals' data, we can look at the whole entire organization as aggregated, but we can also pick different teams of people. For example, we work with a retailer here in the United States, quite a big fashion label, and we work with their sales teams. They have massive amounts of product knowledge that they need to know. And we're able to segment these users, not only as an individual, but by, which retailer they work at, if they work at Bloomingdale's or at Macy's or at Dillard's or at an independent store location, what region they're in, what city they're in, who their selling manager is, who their regional manager is. And what this allows us to do is to really peel back more and more layers of that onion, and look at the different layers. In turn, it allows us to analyze not only the individuals, not only the organization as a whole, but it gives us the data to really every layer along the way. We can compare regional directors to one another. We can compare sales managers to one another. Yeah. In academia, if you have 5 fifth grade teachers who are teaching the same subjects, yet one of them has a lot better data than the others, we're now teaching the teachers. So, and we can obviously look at the whole side of things from the side of content as well, not just from the user side, but be able to identify, this is the 10% of content that you have to go through.
And also just the whole boredom factor of being endlessly given the same stuff that you know already. You know, I'm learning Spanish at the moment from scratch, and one of the frustrations with the software that I'm using is that there are some things that I just cannot seem to remember, and some things that I remember really easily, and I have no idea why some things stick in my head. But the software is completely agnostic, so it will give me endless repetition of stuff I know, and hardly any repetition of things I don't know. And therefore I get them wrong, and I get them wrong again, and it doesn't seem to ever learn that I actually need certain things focused down for me so that I can bring everything up to a level. So I can see immediately where that would be very, very helpful. And I also think the fact that it's not just the learning, it's not just blame the learner, it's also the environment, the manager, the whatever. So look at the environment. If you've got that holistic view, you can begin to see where it's the software that's actually wrong, or the manager that's wrong, or the training environment that's wrong. And you can fix that and watch the uptick, if you like, on the data. So these things are very, very important and have many, many applications. But I think this is something special, unique, and it clearly works. There's plenty of evidence to show that it works. And this is a company that is evidence-based. They don't make it up. It's not snake oil. This is real science based on evidence. So, Alex, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Nigel, thank you. My absolute pleasure.
Studies have shown that learning programs are now crucial weapons in the fight to attract and retain talent. Working closely with modern learning organizations across the globe, we have developed Learning Programs of Excellence, a prestigious award recognizing exceptional, state-of-the-art learning programs. If you're a learning department or function, LPE will help you attract new talent. You'll boost your appeal as an employer by showcasing the caliber of your learning programs and development opportunities within your organization. If you're a provider of learning, LPE gives you an absolute guarantee that your learning programs are capable of creating a lasting positive effect on performance and business outcomes. Get in touch with the Learning and Performance Institute now and begin your Learning Program of Excellence journey.
Well, that's it for June. We'll see you back for 2 more programs in July. Did you find any great online events, Kate, this month?
I did. There's lots happening.
Good.
So Will Tolheimer's event, the L&D conference, is now live and happening for the next 6 weeks. That opened on the 22nd. We've got the Learning Technology Summer Forum coming up that Don talked about, the 13th to 17th of July. Just before that, our friends at the LPI are running an L&D question time on the 8th of July. And our friends at the Happy Workplace are running their conference on the 30th of July.
Wow, that's the most we've had since lockdown, isn't it? That's excellent.
There's momentum building there, yeah?
Momentum is building, lots going on. So what did you think of the program, Kate? How did you feel this time?
It feels like the mood is turning a little bit, and you know, I know you interviewed my colleague David Perring, and he's talked about the different phases that we're going through as a result of this pandemic, and it does feel like we're moving into this kind of repair and rebuild phase now rather than the kind of immediate crisis phase. And you know, when you look at people like Anna Lynn from Filtered, you know, the 30 under 30, there's so much energy and enthusiasm and passion for our profession. You can't kind of help but feel slightly more optimistic about the future.
It's true, and startups like Blank Slate that I interviewed Alex, and this hasn't affected them at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's given them a vehicle for moving forward very, very fast. They're really consolidating and looking forward to the future, not panicking about the past. And I suppose that's a kind of theme running through, isn't it? Let's not panic any longer about the past. Let's consolidate and build for the future. Not a bad message from the program, I think. You agree, Kate?
Extremely positive, yep.
Good. Well, we'll see everybody next month. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.